I just got back from teaching a workshop at Washington Square Park this now, and it was a wonderful day. About 50 people came out. I was blown away by the response. There's so much enthusiasm for watercolor, and I wish I had taken a lot more pictures, but I honestly just didn't even have time to relish the attendance and even learn everyone's names. It was just a great time, and I had to go around to over 5 different tables of people and basically go over my fundamental brushstrokes that I like to share, dry on dry, wet on dry, wet on wet. And it was just a really good day. And I am showing this painting. This is a 2-page spread that I completed in my Luchetti Sketchbook. As you can see, I'm almost done with it. I just have 2 more blank spreads, and I'm really excited to be at the end. I can't wait to start working on another sketchbook. But basically, I brought this sketchbook to my workshop just to give people an example of paintings that I've completed. And I specifically pointed out this one because it's an example of, a few things where I'm showing how when you are painting something that even within a particular scene that you are inspired by, you probably will want to employ some sort of design, right? So you need to think about strategically, you want to think about, well, what do I want the viewer to get out of this? What do I want to focus on? What do I want them to walk away feeling inspired by, like I did? And for me, this scene inspired me because I loved the bright light that it's this golden light time in the morning in this little plaza that's near the 190th Street station here in Washington Heights. And I loved the way the bright light was creating this dramatic atmosphere, and the light shining directly on the benches was the thing that I really wanted to capture. So even though I took the picture knowing that I loved the overall scene, I loved the dramatic lighting coming through the iron fence here and hitting the trees, coming through the bench, casting these great shadows, I knew that I would still have to put in some thought, some strategy into designing the scene. And really, I wanted the bench and this high contrast dramatic area to be the focal point. So making that decision meant basically making everything else subservient to this area. And so I decided to leave this area here unfinished. I also left the area on the right side unfinished. And, I could have tried more of a blurry approach, wet on wet, making things a little bit looser, blurrier, but I decided to just use the tactic of leaving things unfinished, letting it trail off, but then also having enough detail as we get closer and closer towards this area, we get more and more detail so that the viewer's attention is drawn in towards this subject. I really love the lamppost too, but I was careful to not make that stand out too much because, again, I wanted the bench in front of it to be the most interesting thing. So you can see the bench has a lot more careful details around it, and I spent the most time using various size brushes to get the very exact angles of the shadows being cast here in these structures. Each bench has 3 sort of concrete pillars. I don't know what they're called, but these supports each have shadows coming down, and I was careful to try to get the angle of the shadows as accurately as possible. And there just was a lot in this little area that I needed to be careful with so that it was convincing enough to the viewer. So coming out from the bench, it was intentional to kind of get looser and looser in terms of detail the further out we got. So with the trees, I did like the trunks. I wanted to really get across the feeling of the trunks. So I did spend a good amount of time with the color and trying to get that as close as possible to my photograph. But in general, I kept the greatest contrast and the greatest precision. I reserved that for the bench area. So this is an example of having to use some design, even in the picture that I composed very carefully. I composed it when I took the picture. I composed it carefully because I knew exactly the scene that I wanted. But even after that, when I decided to put it onto paper, I had to make a bunch of decisions around what was going to be the focal point. If I made everything as detailed as the bench, then yes, it could be a nice, precise image, but then I didn't want just that. I wanted someone to look at this with the same sort of feeling that, and the same sort of attraction that I had. So when we're in this moment, when I was there in this plaza, the bright, dramatic view of the bench is what stuck out to me. So everything sort of from here to the left and from here to the right were just kind of in my periphery. So part of what I shared with the workshop attendees today was sometimes we have to approach a subject matter with that perspective, right? Knowing that if we want to convey the inspiration that we got out of a particular scene, which caused us to want to paint it in the first place, we also have to bring some knowledge to it, bring some context, and bring some design. So we know that when there's something that we're focusing on, everything else around it is really just in the periphery and it's actually out of focus. And I've heard that said that is a way for you to look at a scene in real life when you're painting outdoors. I've heard it said that, just figure out what you want to focus on and try to view the painting and design the painting in the same way that your eye perceives that point of inspiration. Your eyes will naturally focus in on the things that are attracting you. And if you really just look at that scene with your eyes, you'll notice in your periphery that those elements are actually blurry. So it's not very perceptible when we're just walking around looking at things with our own eyes, but things in the periphery are not really in focus. We're just aware of what's out there. So one question that I had from one of the attendees was how I dealt with the highlights. And basically with the trees here, I basically landed on what would be a very, very light yellow that I put down as the base layer for the trees. And so then once that was dry, the tree over here was more of a camouflage tone, and it was darker than these two in the back. And I was pretty careful and intentional about how I colored those trees. You can see that I waited until it was completely dry, that under layer, and then I applied this camouflage layer of color, which was sort of a burnt umber and a green. And then while that was still wet, then I applied some blues to that to really enhance the gradient as to show the volume of the trunk as it went to the right. And that really was to show the darker shaded side. The effect wasn't as great on these trees in terms of the roundedness. There wasn't as much of a shadow gradient that I had to capture there. Another topic that came up was how could I actually paint this? And I had to explain that I didn't paint this in plein air. I didn't do this outside. You know, when you're painting outside, if I wanted to do a very finished painting like this, or even more finished to my liking, it's almost impossible because you're almost like playing 3D or 4D chess, because outside you're dealing with multiple challenges. We have the challenge of the elements. Maybe it's too windy, maybe it's too sunny. The light is changing. You're fighting against time. You may be fighting against your equipment because maybe your brushes are not sized big enough to cover large areas quickly, and you're fighting if the humidity is very low, then everything's drying very quickly, much faster than if you're painting it at home or in your studio. And so this is one of those instances where I took a picture. It was actually a vertical orientation, and I cropped it specifically to a dimension that generally would fit the 2-page spread here in the Luchetti Sketchbook, which is, these individual pages are 8 by 8. So I edited it in Affinity and basically created a reference image that was this dimension, or 16 by 8. And even though the picture wasn't long enough, the original picture wasn't wide enough actually to actually cover all this paper, that was fine, because I ultimately made the decision to make the bench be the most interesting part and just leave these areas unfinished. But to my point about painting on plein air versus painting from the reference photo, I've done this type of scene in my neighborhood several times, so I feel like I have a good sense of what the colors in real life look like, so that when I look at my photo, I have some reference points. And I've seen this scene so many times every day that it felt pretty natural for me to cover that. I've also gone, but otherwise, if this is sort of a new scene, a new environment to me, I just know from previous experience that if I just took a picture and took it home and then painted it in my studio, the photo wouldn't capture the true colors that I saw in that moment. And so there's definitely a value in painting on site and trying to mix my colors to get what I'm actually seeing in the moment, so that later on I can try to recreate that in the studio. And for this type of scene, I definitely began with pencil, because I did want it to be a pretty finished piece where there are architectural elements that I wanted to be precise with. So I'm totally for using pencil whenever needed, especially when I want to capture a lot of detail. And this was one of those pieces that I really wanted to create something for this sketchbook that I could show my students and attendees of the workshop. I wanted to show them how watercolor paintings can really convey drama and a level of detail maybe they're not used to seeing. In the end, I'm happy with how this piece came out. I do love getting into the details sometimes with certain scenes, and this was one of those where I had the chance to really go into the weeds on the benches and try to be as precise as possible, but also use some of my other techniques and experiences to basically inform how I handle the tree trunks and the shadows, and also the gradient here of the iron fence, which basically, you know, I think a few years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this as well. But here there's kind of a magical element of the light shining through all these bars. And I think it was a good experience to figure out how to do this. And basically I did a wash here where I had a very light underlayer similar to the yellow in the tree. And while that was wet, I did a wet on wet technique of adding some darks in here and then waiting till all of that is dry and then punctuating, accenting all the bars with key accents, dark areas that get across to the viewer exactly what that is. And so I feel like I was pretty successful with that. And I also loved doing the blue layers of shadow and mixing in hard edge shadows with softer edge shadows. And I feel like that's something I've learned over the past few years, and I was glad to be able to bring several different learnings and techniques into this one piece. If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. I'm Francis Shui. I'm a practicing artist here in New York City. I love to share about my art and my processes, especially from the point of view of someone who started art later in life. Until the next time, go and paint.